The first drawing method that I want to show you, if you haven't tried this before, I'm going to go slowly. I'm going to explain what it is. And if you have done it before, go right into it. It's blind contour drawing. Now, what does that mean? Blind contour drawing. Blind means you are not looking at your paper. You're looking at your reference. And you're keeping your eyes glued on your reference as long as possible. Just setting up my image here. So, picking a spot, we want to, this is just a quick warm-up sketch. Treat it as that. So with a nice loose sketch paper, loose scrap paper, I'm going to try to make this as big as possible. Now, warming up your arm. What I don't want to do is do this type of line work where it's broken and feathery. What I want is to place my pencil. I'm going to start at the top of the hat. And I'm going to, with my eyes glued to my reference, simply copy the negative space. Now, I can't do this. No way. I have to look at my paper. Yes, you can. But try as hard as possible to make that 9 out of 10 seconds. 9 seconds looking at the reference, and 1 second out of those 10 just glancing down at your paper to see if you're maintaining pace and to see if you're maintaining proportions. Now, what you're seeing is negative space shapes. So if you remember, you recall that face vase exercise where you can actually see two profiles or a vase. Right now, I'm focusing on drawing the faces. So what is it here? It's the negative space and those abstract shapes that are not defined, that you cannot name. Now, the recommendation for this is to go as slow as possible. So think of your eyes. I like this one, this analogy, where your eyes glued to your reference are going for a little hike, and you're picking the direction of the hike, so you're following it like a trail, and what you're going to do is just trace that. So here I'm reaching the end, and you can trace back or you can lift it, and I would recommend doing this, going back to the other side and starting for proportion right from the top again, and continuing that nice silhouette. Now, you'll notice that when you speed up, you are going to lose a bit of track of the curves and those beautiful angular or geometric readings of those negative shapes, but especially those curves. So the more you slow down, the more you give your eyes a chance to not run but walk the trail. And your hand simply records the hike. Do not worry what this looks like. My joke is, it's a portrait of Charles Chaplin. It could look like a foot. It doesn't matter. It really is about creating this silhouette. So right now, all of us would look at this and say, hey, yeah, it kind of looks like it. So now we're going to do the same thing inside. And how do I select the spot or the places of these inner areas and make those negative space? Well, you can create the shapes that you're looking at become the subject. The ones that don't become the negative space. And here again is where I begin to maybe squint a little, see a little more of the value and the contrast. Ideally, you would want to do this, and I'm going to step over this line again, without lifting your pencil. So this exercise works really, really well with one continuous line, which is why it's called blind continuous contour drawing. So here I have all of my contour, and then the looseness to add and gesture and play with some of these lines. Obviously, I'm outside. This is clothing. I see some beautiful angles, and it's a little bit looser, but maintaining a nice pace to give your line and your gestures a really beautiful quality that, believe it or not, it is more accurate to the expression that you're trying to create by drawing those lines the way we usually do. So this is one method that I highly, highly recommend practicing. And it works not just for portraits, it's for everything. And it is the way you should draw. You should keep your eyes, I know I repeat this a lot in the classes, you should be keeping your eyes on your subject more than looking at your paper. So let's go in here. I'm going to find a relationship, and just, this is the key part. Your left brain is going to try to kick in and identify by name these things that are just lines and shapes. So the fight, the struggle becomes, don't let that happen. Don't let the left brain take over. Continue with the hike, identifying the shape, following the trail, keeping your eyes, catch yourself, I'm not there to see it. If we were in a classroom, I would be really looking at how long is your head moving actually. If it's looking up at your reference, great. If it looks down at your paper, I would be able to catch it. So try to catch yourself. And we're going to go right in with one continuous line. And I could add a little bit of value here. Yes, we'll come back and add a little bit of contrast and shadows to it. Now remember, it's not a race. The slower you work this, the better results you'll have. But ideally, you want to have that looseness where we're doing this for the fun, and remember, as a warm-up, to just begin to get familiar with our subject. And the chance that we'll probably be able to do this one once, twice, or even 3 times, which is my goal, will actually open up new ways of seeing it that will make maybe more beneficial to your overall way of drawing. So there's nice, interesting light, very, very low value in and around the nose. It's one of the reasons I chose this image. So iconic. But it's also that high contrast of the light on the face with the dark contrast of these black areas. Even it out, trying to see that shape. Begin to control some of those edges. Let's go ahead and fill some of this in. Begin to see the contrast and the value of them. To see our image just a little bit better. The likeness of our portrait. And there we have it. So a quick contour, line contour drawing. And yes, this needs obviously a little extra work, but as a sketch, as a quick warm-up sketch, this will do the job every single time. And ideally, as a quick warm-up sketch, as a practice, it reveals things that you can do a little bit differently for the next portrait. So from here, I'm just going to flip the page. And I'm going to go to a second method of drawing. Now, I am going to use charcoal, but you can use a soft pencil, graphite pencils. You can use a 4B, 6B, and I'm also going to use some of these blenders. You can use a brush or a paper blender. Also with graphite would be the way to work. And what I'm going to do here is this, a second method of drawing. Also a warm-up, also a sketch, just for practice. What I want to do is step by step so you can visualize. So I'm going to do some lines that I would not do, but in order for you to see how I'm thinking, I'm going to lay down some of these lines. So what does that mean? You don't have to do every single step as I lay down the lines. I'm trying to show you what I visualize. So number one would be the biggest, simplest shape, which literally goes something like this. And it's almost a big, elongated egg that rounds at the top. And from here, I'm just going to take straight line at an angle, and you could not even break them into two. So there we have it. Whoa, what's going on here? Now, I could break this simpler into two separate shapes, which would be, first, I want to see the head, which you have to see a little bit beyond for proportions and to actually finish up. Where would the top of the head be? So I would, this is one of those lines that I said I wouldn't usually, but I want to visualize where would be the top of the head, and from there to the top of the hat, we have a different shape. But this one here, so forget about this for a second. This, which is my head, I want to split. I want to find the eye line, which is, as we know, right in the middle. So the distance from here to here, we find the middle point, and we're going to place it here. Now, it's not straight horizontal. There's a little tilt of the angle of the eyes. So you notice that the head is bent and tilting a little bit this way. So I want the center line, the eye line here, to show that. The eyes, this one's going to be a little higher. And then it's not looking straight forward at us. It's turning just a tiny bit this way. So I'm going to use that center line. So with this foundation right there, you could almost begin to see, I could literally go here, 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 which would be here. And you can almost see it coming together as a head, as a face. So this is my fundamental basic shape, simplest, biggest. And then what I want to do is figure out what happens to this second shape up here. So simplified, and it's basically constructing. Doing a little bit of construction. Notice that the lines are simple and straight. And now I begin to maybe add a little bit of curve. So with this, what I want to do is obviously elaborate. This becomes more elaborate as a drawing. And I just wanted to show you the first steps because I am going to go back and do this again with color pencil or graphite. But simply put, I'm going to squint just a little bit, begin to add a little bit of that negative space. And as a quick sketch, I could literally add just a little bit of charcoal here, a little bit of charcoal there, a little more charcoal here. And there we have it. Before I even break down into lines, a little more of that negative space. The beauty of this, and also what you can do with developing some of that graphite, would be to bring in in this case, a paper blender, and blend some of this material. So the reason I did the eyes like this is because that beautiful dark contrast or makeup around the eyes, that is such a, it's going to be the highlight of my portrait. And as I use this technique, question, can I combine a little bit of this step by step? This is sort of, it could be called, although I didn't do blocking yet, meaning we block it out, we try to do the three-dimensional appearance of it by adding side and carving it out of those basic shapes by beginning to break the line And finally, coming to the end, we add those touches that are our finishing details. And in this case, where I would want to spend a lot of time, or more time than any other place, would be the eyes. And then shifting some of the lighter values. And one last thing I want to show you. With graphite, obviously a little bit easier too. We have a little bit of shadow on this side, not so much on this side, but I could also bring in an eraser and then draw with it. So drawing some light back into areas. Now using this one, or we have others that are more specific. This one is almost like a pen to draw with, to draw the light back in. Our Tombow Mono Zero, and that sketching quality. So that would be an easy way to construct from biggest, simplest, basic shapes to smaller, more complex, and then eventually darker as well. And now, for our final portrait, now that we're past beyond the warm-up, I would select, well, which method of these would be better for me? So I'm going to use a mix, but mostly this one that we saw. And I could continue, I guess, with this portrait, but let's start it from scratch on a nice piece of paper. So this Bristol paper here, I'm going to use for my portrait. And let's see, we're going to mark, just get a sense of proportion. I said I was going to use color pencil. And if you're using graphite, ideally you would want to work your way through at least 3 pencils, 2H or HB, then a 2B, then a 4B, or jump from 2B to 6B. And there are great opportunities here to work with that contrast from very, very light to dark. So let's see how this goes. We're going to start once again with basic, simple shapes. I want to maybe start with the big read of the proportion. And I felt from that from the previous sketch, I feel like I did not give it enough tilt. I want to almost place my pencil and set it right through the middle of the nose and capture that angle first. Which, if you see, is it like this or is it less than this? It's right about there. So I want that angle, see, and I need to exaggerate it. So I want to catch that angle first. This is a big tip here. Capture that angle, exaggerate it a little, and then, again, you don't have to draw it this dark. And then from there, we develop that egg shape we started off with, which is our head. So combining just a few of these different methods of drawing, as I'll bring this, and knowing that it might have been a little higher right there, I'm going to find my eye line. Make sure your middle, the tendency is to put it a little bit higher than the middle, so our head looks a little squished. And then we're going to find that eye line. And I'm going to tilt it again just a little bit more this way. And I'm just adding the lines for the nose and mouth, which is middle. And you almost see a face. Our brains cannot help it. We see a face happening here already. I'm going to add just a measurement for the eyes, just to get a sense of scale. And that lines up with my nose, which angles a little, and then with our mustache. And then just the upper part of the tiny bit of the upper lip. And we have a nice, beautiful drop into the round chin right here. So there's my structure. Let's go ahead and begin to follow this a little further with some of these lines and bring it up to the hat. Now, I notice with this drawing, you can make the hat too big, meaning too long and round, or too small. And the tendency is to make it smaller. So make sure you get a way where you can read what is the distance. And if you do a quick measurement of where it starts to the chin, and then from there, it's quite a bit. You'll notice that, oh yeah, it's actually larger than I would want to draw it. The tendency sometimes is to flatten it out, make it smaller, put the line a little higher. And it's our relationship to faces. From the time we were babies, the first thing we love to look at, the face of mom, connecting with the eyes. So it's ingrained in the way we see and how we recognize, which is very, very one of the toughest things to unlearn in order to draw what you are seeing. Because most of the time we're drawing what we think we know. And that's why sometimes we're not satisfied with the results. Because we don't realize, well, I was drawing what I think is a face, not what I'm looking at right here. Which is just lines, as I can show you here. Lines organized in a specific size and relationship. Let's go ahead, before we move into stage 2, I want to go ahead and finish some of this here. So looking at some of these, we're going to start same way with a little bit of angle. Break this line into 2, and then the same thing here. And I'm going to really simplify that area. So you're seeing a lot of line here from the setup. You can, before you move to second stage, erase most of them that you won't need anymore. Some of these center lines. And it's basically doing a little bit of cleanup. As our line gets a little more, in this case, will be like that first contour drawing. I want to begin to see the edge. And I'm going to, here I would suggest maybe shifting to a darker pencil. And give it a little bit of, notice the grip. Remember, overhand grip, underhand grip. How you hold the pencil. If you hold it a little longer, it's going to be more gestural, more expressive. But here, you want to practice your method of drawing, including the grip you should be using. And allow some of these, what we call mistakes, to actually show up. They are what makes a drawing very unique. It's your subconscious, your gesture, your energy, the way you connect with the subject, coming through in a mark, in a gesture, in a line. And the more we try to control it, the more we lose what makes it beautiful. Now, the other is, when do I begin to focus on detail? It should be never. All the way at the end, you're still working with what should be or read as abstract shapes, lines and shapes. And maybe when you begin to think of value. So what's lighter, what's darker? But all the way through, you want to be thinking about lines and shapes, and then relationships between those lines and shapes, so they go where they need to be and create that illusion. The moment we feel we need to start drawing detail, that means you got stiff, the way you're seeing it changed, and you're trying to control. You're trying to force. So that looseness is what I really highly recommend seeking out, trying to find a way to become a toddler the way you used to do it. Guaranteed. That's a guarantee. All of us, way back, didn't even have to be a color pencil. It could have been anything. And start the mark making. I'm going to go a little bit into blind contour here. Work most of this. It's not my highest interest. I want it to be nice. And by nice, I mean expressive, quality of line, nice contrast here and there with good gesture. Obviously, a good read of what's going on. But it's a perfect opportunity to do 100% blind drawing. Anytime you're doing plants, leaves, textures, in this case clothing, you should go 100% blind. And you get that kind of quality of line there. The more you allow that to happen, the happier you will be eventually when you practice, and don't give up on it. Like I said, you're drawing a portrait and it may look like a foot. I hear that all the time. But the quality of line is going to be so much closer to what it should be that it is beautiful. And when you begin to recognize that and allow it to happen more and more, and then you can actually figure out the formula to make it happen more consistently. That's what you want. It starts with keeping your eyes on the subject. So I would say that's pretty good right here. Very happy. Can I bring that over here? Well, because it's a face, I mentioned our relationship to faces goes way, way, way back. And so it changes. It's something about the way we have to break away from language almost. Because here, yeah, I could have been thinking jacket, collar, tie, but I wasn't. I was just seeing lines and shapes. So the non-verbal, where you're not thinking of words. Here, even if you're not thinking words, as you see it, your subconscious is thinking ear. And there's something about ears that you just go whoop, like a cartoon. Or when it gets into eyes, nose, and mouth, that's even harder. So how do you stay in that, what ideally happens in that blind contour mode? It generally happens easier there when you practice it and you make it longer. I know today's was short, but usually when you allow that to happen for 5, 10, 15 minutes, you really enter a zone, and it's spatial. It is about 100% right brain and how it sees and reads spaces. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast here with a little bit of texture. So I'm laying it flat, bringing it over just a little bit before I get into these. And as you can see, we begin to add more volume by enhancing contrast and creating this illusion of light and roundness. So this is where, if you're working with graphite, I would highly suggest using a paper blender or a brush to enrich that value by expanding it. What do I mean by expanding it? The range. When you use a paper blender or a blending tool, you are breaking what would be usually one or two dark light into several gradations which is more natural. It does look and reads more realistic. Here I'm doing it by just lightening the pressure. And obviously the amount of saturation in one area. While also the direction of the line. There we go. So it does read a little bit light here. With a tiny bit of curve to some of that line. And eventually I'll want to come down here and add a lighter version of that. So notice how I hold the pencil way longer and do just a quick hatch pattern here. Almost just coloring it in. Let's go finish up this side. Changing the direction so it follows the fold and the grain, I guess, as we see it. And there we have it. So next, we're going to really have fun with this. So there's changing values here. I'm going to soften my grip as much as possible and begin to squint a lot more. When you squint, and you can see the variation from white to light gray to dark gray to black, and then replicate that. If you could do that, and literally just like that, 1, 2, 3, 4, from the white of the paper to a light gray to your dark gray and then black, if you see any black in here, that is how you finish the illusion. It's how it comes together. So I like to start with some of the darker areas and bring them up slightly. I don't want to go too dark too fast. But wherever I see black, and you got to be careful because depending on the quality of the image, you're going to see big spots of black and you're just going to make all of it even. It also it then becomes just a silhouette. You want to read some of the variation of those grays, and that's where the skill, that's where the pleasure of drawing comes in, where you can break it down, do a variation of it, and with lots of patience, just really enjoy that hike, enjoy that little walk as you keep your eyes on the reference and get more and more familiar with it. So I'm going to go into some of the shapes here, starting with very loose lines, lots of squinting. And just forgetting, you almost have to forget the thing you're drawing and see it as completely new, as if you've never seen it before. What am I talking about? This thing here. It's so interesting. It's full of life and full of light. I wonder what it's called. It's a good trick, trying to forget that you think you know what it looks like. I think it's the biggest tip I could ever give you. Just getting rid of the verbal and the symbol of it. Allowing yourself to see it as if it were for the first time. Some of the lines begin to get smaller, more complex. Therefore, we begin to feel it as detailed. But notice that I'm drawing with the exact same looseness. Maybe a little slower pace, that's all. to add some of these shapes. And then I'm going to slowly render and blend some of this light. And you can really have fun. We could have spent the entire hour just drawing the eyes, and it would have been amazing. It's a beautiful. There's something magical about them. It's all the light in the eye with the contrast and the darks around it that I think make it so interesting, including inside the eye with that beautiful dark edge and then that nice little highlight and that very tiny pupil. And I'm going to shift a lot of the variation there of values to try and capture that eye. I got to get a little looser. I got a little too tight here. And then begin to expand those. A good way to think about it is white, light gray, dark gray, black. Where would this one fit in? And usually when you match them, so I know the answer to this one here, this next shape, that's my black. So everything that's near and around it that would be considered dark gray should match as close as possible. And if you break it just into those four, usually if you could do more than that, you are in really good shape. And I'm talking about values. But 4, 5, as I said, using the white of the paper as your light and beginning to push light grays, dark grays, and then black, you should have a complete and very rich drawing. Or painting for that matter. Because that's what almost takes it a little bit away from drawing and into what begins to feel like you're painting it. And what it is you're reading light. Interesting, very light grays and shadows under the nose, which is what gives us that volume, along with those nostrils here, which are just as dark as probably the darkest we have on the whole page. Notice that I'm moving around trying to maintain the relationships, but I did have my markings early on. A little bit of light gray and then a soft contrast with dark gray right at the edge, just a hint at the roundness of the edge of the nose. And then everything else we could do away with, meaning on this side of the nose. Here we could add a little bit of light gray so it reads as volume. And the problem when you begin to work with volume is if you work a light gray and then your light gray is a little close to the dark gray, we begin to lose the effect of the light gray. So how do you keep contrast between those values? Mastering the quality of your stroke, the quality of the line. But as you can see, it's coming together. We're going to read, and a little bit of anatomy as well. You have to use your knowledge without it letting it dictate. Because every time we see a subject, every single time it's different. The light is different, the pose is different. He's got a little bit of pull right into this eyebrow here, which makes it look like he's raising that expression, which is priceless. And you just create that with a little bit of extra value and a few lines to hint at the muscle and the way the light reads on the muscle. And we're going to finish our final side over here with the eye. Really forgetting what you think you know and allowing yourself to see this as if it were for the first time. I think it's a great way, and it works not just for drawing. It works beautifully for when you meet new people. It's so easy to think we know someone just by the way we have our prejudgments. But if you look closely, and in a way what we're doing here, if you listen and if you study and you connect, you find beautiful things. Beautiful things you didn't know you could find. And there we have it. A few extra strokes, a little extra line detail here and there, a little more volume. As I said, I did not work with a blender because I used color pencil, but there are obviously other color pencils we could have used with grays, not actual color, but just black and white and grays to enhance what is a little easier doing with graphite, that blending. Let me bring a little lighter gray here. And there we have it. Also, as I always say, knowing when to stop. Knowing that you've reached a point where anything else you do to it is going to overcook it. So maybe taking a pause, backing away just for a few feet and a few minutes will let you come back to it with fresh eyes and actually see something you were missing before. I do want to try, maybe just for once, haven't done this before. I'm going to try to blend a little bit of this on the side here. And guess what? It's working. So here's one thing. I did it so soft, it's not really rubbed on. So I can actually work some of this color pencil, and maybe it's some of the graphite that's on this blender. I don't want to... No, but it is actually. The color pencil is blending. So I'm going to create a little bit of shading, a little bit more contrast. Pulling back a little bit of line. And also, maybe bring a little bit of light with an eraser. See how that would work. So always paying attention to the strategy, the formulas, the fundamentals. So what we did today, knowing how to work from biggest, simplest to smaller, more complex, from light to dark, from the edge, the contour, the line, and then value. I think it's the one thing you really, really want to pay close attention to. How are you reading and working values? How are you making use of that fundamental element? There we have it. A beautiful portrait, a great study looking at two simple methods. Hope you enjoyed it.